Hello, we are here to provide more information and clarity around special education budgets at Denver Public Schools. We aim to provide information and resources to parents, families, community members, and DPS educators. We have a budget cycle in Denver Public Schools that is continuous. Our fiscal year starts July 1st. In May, the Board of Education passes the budget. When we start talking about budgets, we are talking about the 19-20 school year. In September, October, the finance team pulls a 5-year forecast. What are the property values and what is the revenue coming from the state? The state controls a lot of the money Denver Public Schools receives. The state issues quarterly forecasts. The finance office does projections 5 years out. This tells us how much we can spend and if we will be cutting or having additional money to allocate. We have mostly been in place where we are cutting. We try to protect the schools from any cuts, but we are also seeing declining enrollment. That means less funding from the state, and that is projected over the next couple of years. We are seeing this because of low birth rates nationwide. We are also seeing gentrification in Denver, which is another contributing factor. In September, we do a fall adjustment. Schools get their budget in January, and that is a projection, but then we look at how many students are in schools in September to do the adjustment. In October, we do the official pupil count, and we send that to the state, and that tells us how much the state will fund us. In November and December, departments will start working on their priorities on how they want to spend budgets. In January, the finance office presents a state of the budget to the Board of Education. Then we determine how much to allocate to schools. Schools receive their budgets in January so they can start hiring. The sooner schools can get their budgets, the sooner they can plan the positions they need and get positions posted, because there's a strong correlation between the earlier of a hire, the best pool of candidates that we receive, and that translates into better outcomes for all of our students. Departments do their budgets in February and March. The Colorado legislature gets a forecasted revenue in March, and the Joint Budget Committee sets the budget. We usually get the budget by the middle of April. Then DPS works on creating a proposed budget to the Board of Education in April for them to vote on in May, based on what the legislature adjusted. Within DPS, we can usually predict what the legislature will approve within a few $1 million. As soon as we propose the budget, we start working on the next year's budget cycle. The School Finance Act passed in 1994 and hasn't been updated since, and is thus pretty antiquated. We go into October and we tell the state this is how many students we have by grade, and they give us money based on certain characteristics. For example, if you are a free and reduced lunch student, there is money coming in for that. Cost of living means providing some money as well. There is a size factor because DPS costs more money to run on a per pupil basis. Also impacted are online students who have concurrent enrollment. The legislature takes the number of students times all of the aforementioned information, and that becomes our total per pupil funding. Then on top of that, we have categorical funding. This is where we get money for December count, and it grows by inflation each year, and that is operated by the state. The categoricals are gifted and talented, special education, transportation, and English Language Proficiency Act. Amendment 23 says that you are required to increase spending on education by inflation and student count each year. K-12 education is 43% of the state's budget. The state couldn't afford the inflation, and the legislature had to cut K-12 education, and they didn't grow it by inflation, but cut it. If we fully funded K-12 education through Amendment 23, then we would receive $75 million more than we are getting under the current act. This is the fourth attempt to raise more money for K-12 education. The Great Schools Thriving Communities just submitted over 100,000 signatures to try and get on the ballot. It would create $1.6 billion for education if passed through a progressive income tax and changes in property tax through the Gallagher Amendment. DPS would see between $120 million and $160 million of that amount. Denver Public Schools represents 10% of the state's education population. There are some specific things in that formula that would increase special education funding as well. What happens at the state level is different than what happens at the district level. We have local control in Colorado, which means districts decide how much money goes directly to their schools. Every school district does it differently. We have student-based budgeting, which means the money follows the students in Denver Public Schools. We look at the number of students in a school, and then we put in demographic data for those students and the programs that go into a school. For example, a center-based program. We allocate a certain amount for each center-based program, and it is not done on a per-pupil basis. The goal of this is to get dollars where there are needs within the schools. We have really targeted schools with high poverty and prioritize putting money there. Our pathway schools are small, specialty schools, and they cost a lot more per student, and that is why we separate them in how we budget for them. State law dictates how we budget for charter schools. We have to pass money through DPS to the charter school according to state law. We then charge this charter school fees, specifically fees for special education. Charter schools all pay the same amount of money for special education. Schools with fewer special education students will receive less money for special education. Mild moderate students is a new category for school year 2018-2019. The dollars are still going out to schools, and schools getting that money earlier can actually plan better for it. It's important to get the budgets out to schools in January so they can plan and hire as early as possible. 64% of our budget at Denver Public Schools is going directly to schools. The remainder goes to operations and managed school expenses, which includes facilities, transportation, etc. In the budget detail from 2015 through 2019, you can see where special education funding has been increasing each year. This year, there is a 2.9% increase in funding for the overall special education budget. $93 million in 2018 and $95 million in 2019. Per pupil count is going up each year as well. Where the money that is being spent for center-based programs has not changed, but where it is being accounted for has changed. When it comes to center-based programs, school principals do not have the ability to repurpose the center program money. Principals have line of sight over that aspect of the budget, but they do not control it. School psychologists, school social workers, and school nurses are doing more than special education. When you look at the budget for special education, this is the only time they are using their time for students with IEPs. We send a survey out at the end of each year to all related service providers and have them submit their time, and then the budget office analyzes it to determine how much of their time is spent on special education. Our revenue has grown by 4.6% over the past 5 years. Expenses over those same 5 years has grown by 15.3%. We have to report to the federal government what we spend on education. What we spend next year has to be equal to or greater than what we spend this year. Additional effective needs supports include adding a half-time, full-time equivalent professional in our elementary schools with center-based programs. We needed to adjust $11 million out of the DPS budget. Every department had to propose a 3% and 5% budget reduction. Some departments had 7% reductions because student equity and opportunity, and special education in particular, could not cut as much because of special education and gifted and talented services. Thank you very much for your interest in this area and your support of students in Denver Public Schools.